They expected human aid ships, not the arrival of a massive human war armada. Part 1: The Distress Call. The station of Meridian Prime floated at the center of known space like a jewel hung between stars. It was a massive, spinning ring of metal and glass, home to diplomats, traders, and scientists from 14 different civilizations. On a clear day, if you stood at the right observation window, you could see 6 different suns glowing in the distance. It was the kind of place that made a person feel small and important at the same time. On this particular day, none of the people inside were thinking about the view. The main council chamber was full. Every seat was taken by an ambassador or an aide, and the air smelled of nervous energy and too many different alien bodies in one room. On the wide display screen at the front of the chamber, images cycled in slow rotation. Colony worlds with craters where cities used to be. Ships broken apart in orbit. Refugees pressed into cargo holds with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The Oran Collective was dying, and the galaxy was watching. The Oran were not a warrior people. They had never built warships. They had no soldiers, no defensive grid, no weapons worth speaking of. What they had were great libraries, deep gardens, music that could make even hard-hearted species stop and listen, and a reputation across 14 civilizations as the kindest people anyone had ever met. They were healers, thinkers, and artists. They had spent centuries contributing to the galactic concord without asking much in return. None of that had protected them when the Velkai Dominion came. The Velkai were reptilian, old, and patient in the way that only empires built over many centuries could be. They moved slowly when they had to and fast when it served them. 3 days ago, they had moved fast. Without warning, without a declaration, without even the pretense of a reason, their fleets had entered Oran space and begun the work of conquest. 17 colony worlds had been hit in the first wave. The Oran had sent distress signals to the Concord. Then they had sent more desperate ones. Then, from some of those worlds, the signals had simply stopped. Ambassador Lena Hartwell sat near the back of the chamber and watched the other ambassadors talk. She was a human woman in her early 50s, with short gray hair, steady brown eyes, and the kind of posture that made people assume she was always paying attention. She was. Lena had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Concord for 11 years, and in that time she had learned one important thing about the way most alien civilizations thought about humanity: they did not think about humanity very much at all. Humans were young. Humans had only been members of the Concord for 40 years. Humans had a small fleet, a modest collection of colony worlds, and a habit of expressing emotions in ways that other species found either charming or embarrassing depending on their mood. The Terosai ambassador, Chivik, had once described humanity to a colleague as a people still learning to walk. He had not meant it as an insult. That was almost worse. Lena had heard the comment. She had written it down. She kept notes on a lot of things. Now she sat with her data slate on her knee and listened as the chamber argued about what to do. The debate had been going on for 4 hours. Several ambassadors wanted to send a formal protest to the Velkai Dominion. Others wanted to open negotiations for refugee transit corridors. A few suggested economic pressure, reduced trade agreements, suspended diplomatic relations. Every suggestion was careful. Every suggestion was cautious. Every suggestion treated the Velkai Dominion as something too large and too dangerous to push directly. No one suggested military intervention. Lena understood why. The Velkai Dominion had the largest fleet in the known galaxy. Their warships were old and well-built and operated by crews who had spent generations learning how to fight. No single Concord member could match them. A coalition might, but coalitions took time to build, and time was exactly what the Oran did not have. Elder Sevi's face appeared on the emergency channel for the 3rd time that day. He was a small being, bioluminescent patterns moving slowly across his pale skin, and he looked exhausted in a way that went beyond sleep. He spoke with the translation software keeping pace beside his words. He said that his people were not asking for vengeance. He said they were not asking anyone to start a war. He said they were asking for help, and they were asking now, because there might not be a later. The chamber fell quiet after that. Then the debate started again. After 2 more hours, a vote was called. The Concord would send a humanitarian convoy. Food, medicine, emergency shelters, water systems. It was the kind of response that felt like doing something. It would help the people who survived long enough to receive it. The vote passed with 11 in favor, 2 abstaining, and 1, the Tarosai, taking a long time before finally voting yes. A supplementary request was added to the resolution. Any Concord member with available vessels was asked to contribute ships to the convoy. It was a polite ask. Everyone expected polite answers. A ship here, a cargo hauler there. The request reached every member civilization's representative in the room. Lena Hartwell read it on her data slate. She closed the document. She picked up her personal communicator, the encrypted one she kept in her jacket pocket, and she typed a message. It was short. It took her less than 10 seconds to write. She had been thinking about what she would type for a long time, in the quiet moments over many years, in the back of many rooms just like this one. The message contained 3 words. They said yes. She sent it and put the communicator away. Then she folded her hands in her lap and returned her attention to the chamber, where the other ambassadors were still discussing convoy routes and supply manifests and the logistics of delivering mercy to a people who were running out of time. Nobody paid much attention to Lena Hartwell sitting quietly at the back. Nobody ever did. That, she had long ago decided, was perfectly fine. Far across the galaxy, on a ship that no foreign sensor array had ever been pointed at long enough to properly measure, a man named Coldraven read the 3-word message on a secured display and allowed himself a single slow breath. Then he turned to the officer standing beside him and said 2 words in return. Wake everyone, they expected human aid ships. Not the arrival of a massive human war armada. Part 2, something is coming. The Velkai patrol ship sat at the edge of Orin space like a guard dog on a long leash. Its name, translated into Concord Standard, meant unyielding Fong, which was a very Velkai sort of name for a ship. It was a medium-sized vessel, well-armed, with a crew of 60 and a captain named Skez who had been running border patrols for most of his adult life. Skez was not worried. The Concord had voted to send a humanitarian convoy. His intelligence reports had told him this. A few supply ships, some medical haulers, maybe a small armed escort if the Concord was feeling brave, which, in his experience, they rarely were. He had already decided how he would handle it. He would intercept the convoy at the boundary marker, demand they identify themselves under Dominion transit protocols, and make them wait for clearance. Just long enough to be inconvenient. Just long enough to remind them who was in charge of this part of space now. He was reviewing the patrol schedule when his sensor operator called out from across the bridge. The operator's voice was calm at first. A contact on long range. Probably the convoy coming in earlier than expected. Skez told him to get a reading and not bother him until there was something worth talking about. A minute passed. Then 2. Then the sensor operator spoke again, and this time his voice was different. Skez crossed the bridge in 4 steps and looked at the display himself. The screen was showing a cluster of subspace distortion signatures, the kind that indicated ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. He counted the signatures on the screen. Then he counted them again, because the first count had not seemed right. It still was not right. He told his sensor operator to recalibrate the array. The operator did. The signatures did not change. If anything, there were more of them now, appearing at the edges of the skin range as more ships finished their transit and settled into real space. Skez opened a channel to Fleet Command and began describing what he was seeing. There was a pause on the other end. Then a request to recalibrate again. He said he already had. Another pause, longer this time. Then a senior officer's voice, slower and more careful than before, asking him to hold his position and continue reporting. He kept watching the display. The signatures kept coming. Far away, on the capital station of Meridian Prime, a communications officer knocked on the door of the main council chamber and entered without waiting to be invited. The ambassadors were still debating convoy logistics. They looked up. The officer's expression stopped the room. She said that something large was entering Orin space from the direction of Earth. The chamber went very quiet. Screens lit up around the room as aides pulled data from the long-range sensor network. Numbers began appearing. Contact counts began updating. One ambassador asked for clarification. The number on the screen updated again, higher than before, and nobody asked for clarification after that. Ambassador Chivik of the Tarosai stood up from his seat and walked to the nearest display. He had served in the Concord for 40 years. He had dealt with every kind of crisis that 14 civilizations could produce. He was not, by nature, a man who was easily startled. He looked at the contact count for a long moment. Then he sat back down very slowly. Nobody in the chamber noticed that Ambassador Lena Hartwell was not in her seat. She had left 2 hours earlier, quietly, telling only her aide that she had some private communications to attend to. On the edge of Oran space, the Velkai fleet was no longer going about its business. Supreme Commander Vreth the Unbroken had received Skez report and a dozen others like it, and now he stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display with an expression that nobody on his crew had seen on his face before. Vreth was a large being even by Velkai standards, with dark-scaled skin and eyes the color of old copper. He had commanded warships since he was young, and he had never, in all that time, seen a sensor reading that made him want to look away. He was not going to look away now. But he was also not going to pretend that what he was seeing made easy sense. The human ships were registering in hull classifications his intelligence division had no records for. There were vessel profiles among them that were simply unknown, sizes that did not match anything in the Concord member fleet databases. And the databases were thorough. The Velkai had spent a great deal of time and money making sure they understood exactly what every Concord civilization was capable of putting into space. Apparently, they had missed some things. His tactical officer gave him the current count. Vreth asked her to give it to him again. She did. The number was the same. He asked her if there was any possibility of a sensor error. She said she had checked 3 times. He asked her if there was any possibility that these were not military ships. She pulled up the hull profile analysis on the nearest screen. He looked at it. He did not ask any more questions about whether they were military ships. He thought for a moment about the Oran worlds his fleet had taken. 17 colony worlds. Good territory. Rich in certain minerals the Dominion needed. The campaign had been going smoothly, ahead of schedule, with minimal resistance. The Concord had protested. He had ignored the protests. He had done this before. The Concord always protested. The Concord never did anything about it. He was beginning to revise that assumption. Elder Sevi of the Oran was on a refugee transport moving away from his homeworld when one of his aides touched his shoulder very gently. The elder had not slept in 2 days. He had spent those 2 days watching reports from his people, counting losses, trying to hold himself steady enough to be useful to those who needed him. He had been grateful for every aid worker, every supply ship, every small kindness that any civilization had sent. He had learned to be grateful for small things because small things were all that had come. His aide told him that human ships were entering the system. Sevi asked how many. His aide did not answer right away. Instead, he turned the display screen so the elder could see it. Sevi looked at the screen for a long time. The bioluminescent patterns on his skin, which had been dim and slow for 2 days, shifted. Something was moving behind his eyes that had not been there before. He asked his aide what the humans had sent. His aide said he was still trying to count. They expected human aid ships. Not the arrival of a massive human war armada. Part 3, The Armada Speaks. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a pattern that no one in the known galaxy had a name for. Most fleets entered real space in loose clusters, ships arriving near each other but not in any strict formation, because coordination at that level across hundreds of vessels was considered nearly impossible. The mathematics were too complex. The timing was too precise. The margin for error was too small. The humans did it anyway. 812 warships dropped out of transit within 40 seconds of each other, and as they did, they slid into a formation that the Velkai tactical computers began trying to classify and simply could not. It was not a line formation. It was not a wedge. It was something geometrically precise and deeply unfamiliar, a shape that seemed designed not just for fighting but for making sure every enemy sensor in range understood exactly what it was looking at. The display screens across the Velkai fleet lit up all at once. On the bridge of the EFNS Dominion's end, Admiral Cole Draven stood with his hands behind his back and watched the formation report come in. The Dominion's end was his flagship, and it was a very large ship. It was the kind of ship that, if you were on a smaller vessel and you looked out your window and saw it, you would spend a few seconds just staring before you remembered what you were supposed to be doing. Draven had commanded it for 6 years and he still appreciated the way other ships moved around it. He was a lean man, not tall, with close-cut gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of serious work done seriously. He did not speak much when he did not need to. He did not make speeches. He had found, over the course of a long career, that actions were far more efficient than speeches and caused significantly less confusion. He looked at the formation confirmation on the screen. He looked at the sensor data from Orin space. He looked at the position of the Velkai fleet, 310 warships clustered around the worlds they had taken. Then he nodded to his communications officer and asked for an open channel. Every frequency in range was listening when he spoke. The Concord diplomatic bands. The Velkai military channels. The civilian emergency networks. Every sensor buoy in 4-star systems was picking up the signal and forwarding it onward through the relay network until the words reached every ship, every station, and every inhabited world within range. Draven introduced himself without drama. He said he was Admiral Cole Draven of the Earth Federation Navy, commanding the 1st Expeditionary Armada. He said that his fleet had received a humanitarian request from the Galactic Concord and had arrived to provide assistance to the Orin Collective. He said that the Earth Federation recognized the Velkai Dominion's military presence in Orin territory as a violation of Concord Charter and an unlawful act of aggression against a protected member civilization. He said that the Velkai forces had 6 hours to begin a complete withdrawal from all Orin-held territory. He did not threaten. He did not use dramatic language. He laid out the situation the way a person describes the weather. Clear skies to the south, storms to the north, and here is what you should do about it. Then he closed the channel and went back to watching the display. The 11 seconds of silence that followed were the longest 11 seconds that several people on several ships could remember. Then Supreme Commander Vreth responded. He was not calm. He called Draven's arrival an act of war against the Velkai Dominion. He said that humanity was a child species that had made a child's mistake, reaching into business that was not theirs, against a power that would show them exactly how small they were. He said that the Dominion's fleet would destroy the human armada and that Earth itself would answer for this moment of foolishness. His voice was large and controlled and full of the kind of fury that had spent years being very sure of itself. Draven listened to the full transmission without interrupting it. When it ended, he told his communications officer to reply with one word. Understood. At Meridian Prime, the council chamber had stopped functioning as a deliberative body and had become something closer to an audience. Every screen was showing different angles of the same thing, 800 human warships sitting in perfect formation at the edge of Orin space, and the Velkai fleet on the other side of the system, very still, very quiet, as if holding its breath. Ambassador Chivik of the Tarosai had a display tablet in his hands and he was not looking at the sensor feeds. He was looking at formation analysis. He had spent 40 years attending every major military briefing the Concord produced, and he understood fleet tactics better than most diplomats. He was going through the geometrical breakdown of the human formation on his screen and becoming very aware, with each passing minute, that he had been wrong about something important. He had been wrong about it for 40 years. Lena Hartwell walked into the chamber without announcing herself and found her seat. Someone nearby, a Tarosai aide, looked at her with an expression that asked several questions at once. She met the look with her usual calm and said nothing. After a moment, the aide looked away. Another ambassador, one of the younger ones, leaned toward Lena and asked, very carefully, when humanity had built a fleet like this. He said the Concord intelligence assessments had put Earth's total military capacity at roughly 60 warships. He said he was looking at 800. Lena told him that the assessments were based on ships the Earth Federation had chosen to show. She said those were accurate numbers. Those were the ships they had registered with the Concord and operated openly. The ambassador asked about the others. Lena said that Earth had been building ships for 29 years, since the last time the Velkai Dominion swallowed a smaller civilization while the Concord drafted formal protest letters and called it action. She said that nobody had asked what else Earth might be building, so Earth had not felt the need to offer the information. She said it quietly and without any heat in her voice, which somehow made it harder to answer. On his refugee transport, Elder Sevi of the Orin had stopped trying to count the human ships. There were too many of them. Instead, he had asked his aide to find out the name of the human admiral, because he wanted to send a message. He did not know yet what all the words would be. He knew the first two, and he thought that was probably enough to start. The 6-hour clock was running. In Oran space, across the wreckage of 17 colony worlds, something had shifted in the air. The Velkai fleet commanders were receiving the same data their supreme commander had, and they were doing their own arithmetic, quietly, in the places where commanders do their private thinking. The math was not going in any direction they liked. They expected human aid ships, not the arrival of a massive human war armada. Part 4, the weight of 800 ships. 5 hours and 40 minutes after Admiral Cole Draven gave the withdrawal order, the Velkai fleet had not moved. Vreth the Unbroken had spent that time doing several things at once. He had sent emergency signals to Dominion-aligned systems requesting reinforcements. He had ordered his fleet into a tighter defensive grouping around the largest of the captured Oran worlds. He had released a statement on the Dominion's internal broadcast network describing the situation as a human provocation and promising a swift and decisive answer. He had done all of these things with the efficiency of a man who had commanded armies for most of his life. He had also, in the quieter moments between decisions, been doing mathematics. The numbers were not cooperating with him. His fleet in Oran space numbered 310 warships. They were not small ships and they were not crewed by frightened soldiers. Every vessel in his command had been built by the finest engineers the Dominion could produce, and every sailor aboard had earned their position in years of hard service. They were as good a fighting force as the Velkai could put into space. The human formation sitting across the system from them numbered 812 ships. Even without accounting for the hull classifications that his tactical division still could not properly identify, the raw numbers were significant. But numbers alone had never frightened Vreth. He had won battles against larger forces before. Size was not everything. What concerned him, more than the count, was the formation. His tactical officer, a sharp and experienced woman named Veka, had been running analysis on the human formation since the moment it appeared. She kept updating her assessment. The updates kept saying the same thing in different ways. The formation was not defensive. It was not positioned to absorb an attack. It was designed to deliver one, from multiple angles, with overlapping fields of fire, in a way that gave his fleet very few good options for response. Veka was not a woman who overstated things, and she was not overstating things now. Vreth had listened to her assessments. Then he had started thinking about the reinforcements he had requested. They would not arrive in time. He had known this within the first hour. The nearest allied system was too far. The math on that was also very clear. Commander Yusuf Strand stood beside Admiral Draven on the bridge of the Dominion's end and walked through the engagement projections on the shared display. Strand was a young man for his rank, with a quick mind and the habit of preparing 3 answers before anyone finished asking a question. He had spent the last several hours building engagement models under every scenario he could imagine, including ones where Dominion reinforcements arrived early and ones where the Velkai fleet attempted unusual tactics. In every model, the outcome was the same. He told Draven this. He said it plainly, without gloating, because Strand understood that a battle that had not yet been fought was not yet a victory, and also because he had too much respect for Draven to do anything other than tell him the truth straight. Draven listened. He asked a few questions. Then he told Strand he wanted a second transmission prepared, not for Vreth, but for the individual ship captains of the Velkai fleet. He said it should contain the same engagement projections that Strand had just shown him. He said it should also contain something else, a guarantee. Any Velkai vessel that began withdrawal before the clock ran out would be given safe and unobstructed passage out of Oran space. No pursuit. No engagement. No conditions. Strand wrote it up in 15 minutes. It went out on a directed channel to every Velkai ship commander in the system. On the Velkai warship Patience of Iron, a captain named Drez read the transmission twice. He had commanded warships for 30 years and he had seen a great many things in that time, including 2 full campaigns against civilizations that the Dominion had since absorbed. He had not been troubled by any of those campaigns. He had done his duty and he had been proud of it. He pulled up the engagement projection the humans had included in their message. He looked at it for a long time. He was not a slow thinker. He understood the numbers quickly. What took him longer was not the math but something quieter, a kind of settling that happened in a man's chest when he looked at a situation clearly and stopped pretending it was something other than what it was. He thought about the 3 colony worlds he had left behind when the campaign began. He thought about his crew. He thought about Vreth's statement, which had promised a swift and decisive answer, and he thought about what swift and decisive was actually going to look like if 300 ships tried to fight 800 in a formation like the one on his screen. He called his executive officer. He told her to bring the engines to full power and prepare to move the ship. She asked which direction. He told her. She did not argue. The first Velkai ship to move was Dres. Then, within 4 minutes, 16 more. Then a cascade, slow at first and then faster, as ship commanders across the Velkai fleet made the same private calculation and arrived at the same conclusion. Not all of them. Not most of them. But enough that the withdrawal became real, became something that could be watched on a sensor display as a living thing. On the Dominion's end, Captain Petra Olin stood at the tactical station and watched the count of withdrawing ships rise. Olin was Draven's destroyer wing commander, a precise and even-tempered officer who had served under him for 8 years. She called out the numbers as they updated. Draven listened without expression. When the count passed 100, he told her to hold fire on every ship moving in the right direction. He told her to give them room and not to spook them. She said yes, sir, and meant it. 43 ships remained with Vreth's flagship when the clock reached its last 3 minutes. Vreth made one final broadcast. It was loud and full of promises about what the Dominion would do in the weeks and months that followed, about vengeance and consequence and the cost of this moment. His voice was as large and controlled as it had been at the start. Draven did not respond to the broadcast. He waited for the clock. At 1 minute remaining, he told Petra Olin to take the destroyer wing forward. The engagement that followed was visible on sensor arrays across 4 star systems. It was not long. Olin's wing was fast and the geometry of the human formation had already done most of the thinking before a single weapon was fired. When it ended, 43 Velkai ships were wreckage. The rest of the Dominion fleet was in full retreat toward home space, not in chaos but in the organized withdrawal of people who had decided that today was not the day. Draven watched them go. He did not order pursuit. He had said there would be none, and he meant what he said. He told his navigation officer to plot a course for Orin Prime. Not to hold it. Not to occupy it. To stand next to it, the way you stand next to something that matters, so that everyone can see you are there. They expected human aid ships. Not the arrival of a massive human war armada. Part 5, What Humanity Sent. 2 weeks after the engagement, Orin Prime was still scarred but no longer burning. The marks on the planet were visible from orbit, dark lines where cities had been hit, pale patches where fires had moved through forests. Some of the damage would take years to repair. Some of it would take generations. But the ships that were now in orbit above the planet were not warships, or not only warships. Tucked carefully in the center of the human armada, surrounded on all sides by destroyers and cruisers and vessels that the galaxy was still trying to properly classify, were the aid ships. They had been there from the beginning. Supply freighters, medical haulers, construction equipment transports, water purification carriers. They had traveled inside the Armada's formation the entire time, protected, waiting. While the warships had held position and the clock had run and the engagement had happened, the aid ships had already begun computing landing coordinates and unloading schedules. Within an hour of the last Velkai ship retreating, the first human medical team was on the ground. Elder Sevi stood at the window of a temporary shelter on the outskirts of his planet's capital and watched the human ships move overhead. They were enormous things, and they moved with a kind of deliberate slowness that made them seem almost careful, as if aware of how much damage a careless ship could cause. He watched them for a while. Then he turned back to the work of helping his people. He had sent his message to Admiral Draven 3 days ago. The Admiral had replied briefly, in simple words, saying only that the Orin had asked for help and that help had come, and that he hoped the recovery would be swift. It was a short message. Sevi had read it many times. He thought there was something in its plainness that he respected. The Galactic Concord session at Meridian Prime was the quietest one in living memory. This was unusual. Concord sessions were rarely quiet. They were large gatherings of large personalities from civilizations that each considered themselves important, and the noise level was generally considerable. But the ambassadors who settled into the chamber that morning moved carefully, spoke carefully, and watched each other in the way that people do when they are all aware that something has changed and none of them is quite sure how to talk about it yet. Lena Hartwell had been asked to speak first. This had never happened before. In 11 years as Earth's representative, she had always spoken somewhere in the middle of the session, after the more senior ambassadors had established the tone. Nobody had ever asked her to go first. She took a moment at the podium, long enough to arrange her thoughts exactly the way she wanted them, and then she spoke. She told them that Earth had maintained the first expeditionary armada for 29 years. She told them it had been built in the years following the fall of the Sori Republic, which most of the current ambassadors were old enough to remember. The Sori had been a Concord member. The Velkai Dominion had absorbed them over the course of 8 months while the Concord issued formal protests. When the last Sori world fell, the Concord had sent condolences and moved on to other business. Lena said she understood why. She said she did not hold it against anyone. She said that Earth had spent those 29 years reading every intelligence report, every tactical assessment, every diplomatic record it could access. She said that the people who built the Armada had asked a simple question: if this happens again, to someone else, what would actually stop it? The answer they kept arriving at was the same one. Not protests. Not sanctions. Not strongly worded resolutions. Something that cost more to fight than to avoid. She said that when the vote had passed to send a humanitarian convoy, she had sent a 3-word message home. She said the fleet had been ready. The plans had been ready. The supply ships had been loaded and waiting. All it had needed was a reason. The chamber was quiet when she finished. Ambassador Chivik of the Tarosai asked her, very carefully, why Earth had never told the Concord about this fleet. He said it with honest curiosity, not as an accusation, which was unusual for Chivik. Lena looked at him for a moment. She said that the Concord had never asked. She said that 40 years of being considered a minor member, a young species, a people still learning to walk, was a long time to spend building things that no one thought to check on. She said it without bitterness. She stated it as a fact, the way you state the boiling point of water or the distance between 2 stars. Several ambassadors looked at their own hands when she said that. Elder Sevi attended the session through a holographic link from Orin Prime. When it was his turn to speak, he did not address the full chamber. He turned to face Lena Hartwell directly and he used a word in the Orin's oldest language, a language that predated their membership in the Concord by 11 centuries. His aide translated it quietly for the room. The word meant something close to, the one who arrives before the last moment, who asks for nothing, and who leaves things better than they were. He said he would like to apply that word to humanity, if Lena would allow it. Lena said that humanity would be honored, and that the Orin should also consider accepting what came with it. A mutual defense pact. Full and free, with no conditions attached. Because the next time something like this began, she did not want to wait for a humanitarian vote. The pact went to a vote. 12 of 14 Concord members voted in favor. The 2 who abstained did so without comment. Neither of them requested the floor. Both of them requested a private meeting with Ambassador Hartwell the following morning. She agreed to both meetings. On the bridge of the Dominion's end, Admiral Cole Draven stood with Commander Yusuf Strand and Captain Petra Olin and watched repair drones work on the hull of a damaged Orin colony ship somewhere below them. The drones were small and the ship was large and the work was slow, but it was happening. The colony ship was going to be repaired. That seemed, at the moment, like a thing worth watching. Strand mentioned that the Velkai Dominion would be making decisions soon about how to respond to what had happened. He said there were several likely courses of action, and he began outlining them with his usual thoroughness. Draven told him they would have time to think about it on the way home. Strand stopped. He nodded. He had learned, in 8 years of working for Draven, that the Admiral was usually right about timing. Olin looked out at Orin Prime below. She had never seen the planet before this mission. She had looked it up, before they left Earth, read about its libraries and its music and its people. She thought about what it had looked like on the sensor feeds when they arrived. She thought about what it looked like now. Draven said nothing else. He looked out at the same view and left the words where they were, because some things did not need to be said. The fleet around them said everything that needed saying. 800 ships sitting in orbit around a world that was healing, not because anyone had been asked to come, but because someone had decided, quietly and patiently and a very long time ago, that if the moment ever came, they would be ready. The moment had come. They had been ready. That was the whole of it, really. That was the story.